Hi, continuing our study in the book of Matthew, chapter 24, we're looking at these signs of the end. Signs of the end. Now, we've already seen, you had some earthquakes going on. You see that in the book of Acts. You had a famine that was going on in the book of Acts. And you had the false Christs that were going on in the book of John and throughout the whole New Testament. Well, we come to this section where Jesus talks about the end again. And remember, Jesus said, "Not one stone shall be left upon another that shall not be thrown down." And the disciples said, "Tell us, when shall these things be, and what shall be the sign of your coming in the end of the age?" In other words, with Jesus' statement, the temple's going to be destroyed, they knew, wow, tell us, when is it going to happen? What's going to be the sign of your coming in the end of the age? We know all these things are like to accompany the destruction of the temple, but when's it going to be, and what are going to tell us? How are we going to know when the end is near? Well, Jesus says there are going to be false Christs. There's going to be famines, wars, rumors of wars. All right. He says, "He that shall endure to the end shall be saved." Now, here's this end. We're talking about the end of the Old Covenant era. Well, he says here in verse 14, and this is critical, and this is like very, very important. He says, "And this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world as a witness to all nations, and then the end shall come." All right. Now we have to stop there for a second. Because there are a lot of people today that are saying, look, the gospel's about to be preached to all the world. There's a few little isolated third world countries that haven't heard the gospel. And when the gospel goes to all those countries, when all the world hears the gospel, then you know the end is near. And they'll tell you the end is near because the gospel is almost preached to those nations. All right? Now, whether you're a premillennialist or a postmillennialist or an amillennialist, a lot of them would fall into this category of believing this. Well, look, man, it's almost there. The gospel's almost been preached to the end of the world. Well, what does the Bible say? Now, if I ask you the question, if you knew the gospel had been preached, if all of a sudden God came down from heaven and told you, said, hey, the gospel has been preached. Jesus said it was going to be preached to all nations and to all the world, and then the end would come. Well, if suddenly God came to you and said, guess what? Now, the gospel has been preached to all the world. It's been preached to all nations. It's been preached to every creature under heaven. Would you believe that the end was near? Would you? If God just came down to you right now and said, it's been preached. It happened. It's been preached to all the world. Here in the 21st century, it's been preached. Wouldn't you believe that it was near? I mean, after all, there are many people who believe, look, it's almost about to happen. When it does happen, you'll know the end is right around the corner. Okay? Well, what if you answered yes to that, what if I were to show you that God has come down from heaven and said that it had been preached? Jesus said, this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world, and the Greek word there is oikumene, for a witness unto all nations, and then the end would come. Let's look at Acts chapter 17, verse 6 for a moment. Acts chapter 17, verse 6. Again, no scripting here, just reading the Bible. Acts chapter 17, at verse 6. Listen to this. "And when they found them not, they drew Jason and certain brothers unto the rulers of the city, saying, These men have turned the world upside down." Talking about the preaching of the gospel. And the Greek word there for world is oikumene. They've turned the oikumene, the inhabited earth, the Roman Empire, upside down. Say, come on, that doesn't say that the gospel was preached. Well, if these guys were preaching it and all the oikumene, Jesus said this gospel is going to go into all the oikumene and be preached as a witness unto all nations, and then the end shall come. Well, here in the book of Acts, even the enemies of the cross admitted these guys have turned the world upside down. Well, how are they turning the world upside down? The gospel of Jesus Christ. Through Jesus, they were turning the world around. All right? But it gets better. Let's look at Romans chapter 10. Let's see if this was fulfilled. Okay? I think that's fair. If the apostles said it was fulfilled, and Jesus said it was going to be fulfilled, and then the end would come, and the apostles said it was fulfilled, that should tell us something. The end was about to happen back then, not today. All right? Look what he says in Romans chapter 10. He says here, so then faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the word of God. So we're talking about the gospel. Because how do we know? Look at verse 16. He says, but they have not all obeyed the gospel. Just like Isaiah says, Lord, who's believed our report? So then faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the word of God. Verse 17. Then verse 18, listen. But I say, have they not heard? Paul asks a rhetorical question. Have they not heard? Has who not heard? Yes, he says. They have all heard. Watch. Truly, their sound went into all the earth, and their words unto the ends of the oikumene. Paul is saying the gospel had already gone to the ends of the oikumene. That's what Paul said. Now, should we trust the modern prophecy experts today who are trying to tell us that the gospel has gone into all the world today, which it proves that the end is near for us? Or do we trust Paul saying the end? That's why Paul said in Romans, you read it, chapter 16. He says the end is at hand. Okay? Our salvation is nearer than when we first believed, Paul says. Actually, I believe it's chapter 13. Let's read this for a second. Chapter 13, Romans chapter 13. He says here, and that knowing the time, Paul says. Well, how would he know this? Well, he just said the gospel had been preached to all the world, and Jesus predicted that the end would come when the gospel was preached to all the world, oikumene. He says, and that knowing the time, that right now it's high time to awake out of sleep. For now is our salvation nearer than when we first believed. The night is far spent, the day is at hand. That's what Jesus said. You're going to know it's near. You're going to know the end is near when you see the gospel preached to all nations. Okay? Say, wait a minute. Come on, Ward. You've only preached to us. You've only told us that it had been preached to the entire oikumene, right? The inhabited earth. But come on, what did Jesus say? He says here, this gospel shall be preached as a witness, preached in all the world. But it says, as a witness to all nations. Now, come on, are you going to try and tell us that the gospel was preached to all nations? If you can tell us, this question I ask you, if I can show you that the gospel was preached to all nations back then, if I can tell you that, then maybe you should be more inclined to believe that the end was going to happen back then. And that the end was not referring to the end of the physical planet, but instead the end was referring to the consummation, the completion, the end of the Old Covenant era. And I'm going to show you that the gospel was preached unto all the nations in the first century by the Bible. Okay? No extra biblical sources. We're trusting in the Word of God. Okay? We'll see you on the next.